Jim, my air name and my real name. And I was thinking, if some of your classmates do come in late, you can remind them that radio is run by the clock. And if they're late on air, they're going to be out of a job. So you can tell them that. I want to thank you for having me here. A little bit about me. I have spent my entire adult life in the radio and television business. I started off just like you did, in a college classroom, like you are right now. I went to Western Michigan University, where I majored in political science and speech, but it was very heavy on television and radio journalism. And my experience in television and radio has been heavy on the journalism side. I've been a reporter, correspondent all my life, although I have been involved in various other aspects of radio. I was even a rock and roll disc jockey for about a year under a pseudonym, a nom de guerre, if you will. I'll tell you that story a little bit later. I got my start as a freshman in college when I went to work for the campus radio station. I was sitting in my dorm room as a freshman, feeling very sorry for myself because I was away from home, homesick, didn't know anybody, thinking, what the heck am I doing here? And as I looked across the parking lot outside my dorm room window, I could see on the other side of the parking lot the campus radio station with a big sign in the window, help wanted. Well, what the heck? I grew up in Detroit, listening to Detroit disc jockeys, listening to Motown. So I know what disc jockeys do. I know what they sound like. I like what they sound like. So I went in, knocked on the door. I said, you need help. And they said, can you do an audition? I said, oh, yeah, sure, I can do an audition. I had no idea what they were talking about. I didn't know the difference between a turntable and a tape recorder. But I went in and I sat down behind the mic and I mimicked those disc jockeys that I grew up listening to in high school and junior high. And sure enough, they said, yeah, we could use you. So my first ever radio gig was a 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. jazz program on the campus radio station. Clearly, I had a light class load that I could do a schedule like that, but it was a lot of fun. And I spent my first part of my freshman year. Now, at the time, I was not a communications major. I had went to school thinking I was going to be a language major, thinking I was going to, go to the United Nations or the State Department, translate. And I was majoring in French. I was going to be a French linguist. Until I got involved with the radio station and realized where my true love and true calling was. The fact that I was nearly flunking French sent me a signal too. So that was a clear message. And this is the first piece of advice I want to give you today as you start out studying radio and the communication business. Pay attention to the people around you. Here in this class, here at Brookdale, pay attention to your professors, because you never know who's going to help you as you make your way through this business. And I say that because there's a fellow by the name of Henry, who is a year older than me. Henry was a classmate of mine at Western. He was a sophomore, I was a freshman. Henry was the news director of the campus radio station. Heck, he was the whole news department. He grew up when he was in high school, participating in his local radio in his hometown. So he knew a lot about radio. Smart guy. Henry came to me one day and he said, Hickey, this is when I still had the jazz program, right? He said, Hickey, do you want to be a disc jockey all your life? And I said, Henry, I don't know what I'm going to do next weekend. Why do you ask? He said, because I think you should come work with me next semester in the news department. He said, I'll tell you what, if you come work with me, I'll make you the assistant news director. I'm going, well, okay, I'm a freshman already. I have a title. This is a cool business. I said, okay, so I did. Henry he's still alive. In fact, he's an award-winning television investigative journalist in Grand Rapids, Michigan today. And Henry, very smart. It was really Henry who taught me the initial who, what, when, where, why, how of broadcast journalism. How do you cover stories? How do you write stories? How do you present them on the air? What was this radio business all about? It was fun. He and I went around campus with tape recorders in hand, and he taught me how to do this thing called radio, how to interview people initially. And this was back, ready for this? You guys weren't even around. This was back in 1964. So we were asking questions on campus for people on the record. We were asking administration and deans and professors and officers questions that students then didn't ask. This was before all the protests of Vietnam. This was a couple of years before that. We were doing things that other students never did. We would go to the Board of Trustees meetings on the university. Is there a clock in here? Come on in. Board of Trustees meetings, and during the public section of the Board of Trustees meetings, we would ask questions. We would ask the board to justify budgetary issues. Why are you spending so much money on this program? Why is this dean being paid so much? What's going to happen next year when this building needs renovation? Those kinds of questions. You know, here's a freshman asking these. Well, we made a little bit of a name for ourselves on campus for asking these questions and reporting these things on the campus radio station. Great fun. It was just, it really got my juices flowing. So I dropped my language curriculum, which wasn't doing that well anyway, and I moved over to communication. In those days, we did not have a school or department of communication or radio and TV. We had speech. Within speech were radio and TV classes. So my degree is in speech, but it's really heavy on radio and TV. Back to my advice. Had I ignored Henry and just thought he was a Budinsky, if you will, just trying to get in my business, I probably wouldn't have had the career that I had, because it was really Henry who lit the spark of journalism, broadcast journalism, within my soul. And Henry was a student, a fellow student, just like you guys. So pay attention to who's around you, because you never know who's going to be helpful and who's going to assist you in that road. I had a lot of professors. We all do in college. A lot of teachers, professors, instructors. But I had two who were extremely important in my career. Doctors Smith and Rossman. Dr. Smith, unfortunately, has passed away. Dr. Rossman still lives in retirement in Arizona. They were communication and journalism, radio and TV professors who just really thought outside the box in those days and taught me the advances in radio and television and the importance of what we had to do. And I always say, if Henry lit the spark of radio TV within me, Smith and Rossman fanned the flames. And they really set me on the road to my career because they saw something within me. So I really paid attention to them. They paid attention to me, and we became very good friends. So pay attention, not just to the lectures, but to the personalities, to the people. Listen, watch, and as you progress, because there are people everywhere that can assist you in succeeding in this business. So, and it doesn't matter where you're working or what you're doing. Another example, I was working as a busboy during the summer when I was in high school and my freshman year in college. I was working in, I don't know, have you heard of Henry Ford Museum, Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan? That's where I worked. I was a busboy, washing dishes, clearing tables, and I did that for 3 summers. One of the waitresses at that restaurant had a cousin who was the chief radio announcer for the local radio station in Kalamazoo, where my school is located. Okay, you see where I'm going here. He came to visit. He came through the restaurant and visited Greenfield Village. It's a tourist place, And he came through, and she said, her name was Virginia, she said, Jim, my cousin Lee is here. Do you want to meet him? I said, Lee Dersham? She said, yeah. I said, hell yeah, I want to meet him. So she introduced us. He talked to me. He said, what do you want to do? I said, I'm looking for my first job. I met him when I was probably going in my junior year. So I'd been, knocking around radio and TV for a couple of years now. And I said, I'm looking for my first real job. And I'm coming back to school in the fall. And, I'd like to work in this business. I'd like to be a radio reporter or announcer or something. Okay, so he took that information. He went back to his job and told his news director that he had met this college kid at Greenfield Village who was coming back to school in the fall, and that the news director really ought to interview this kid because, he saw something in me too. So the news director did, called me in. I went to school early, he called me in, and they hired me as a junior at Western to be a news writer for the weekend newscasts on this CBS radio affiliate. So my very first real job, commercial radio, was at WKZO, Kalamazoo, Michigan, Fetzer Broadcasting Company. WKZO radio and TV. And it was a job that I was thrilled to have. They didn't pay me a lot of money, but I was, in those days, we actually did 15-minute radio broadcasts. Today we do what, 2 minutes, 3 minutes? But I had to write, as a college student, scripts for 15-minute radio broadcasts in the morning, which was a real education. Moving forward, I began to do more and more at WKZO. They started to let me report. I went out on the street, and then soon I was reporting on television because we were a combined TV, radio, news department. By the time I was a senior at Western, I was anchoring the 11 o'clock TV news on the weekends. Channel 3 Eyewitness News with me, which was cool. I said this to somebody once before at another class that I talked to, and I have to preface with what I'm about to say. I don't advocate what I'm about to say. I don't suggest you do what I'm about to say. But I got so busy working, I cut my hours back and became a part-time student. So it took me 5 years to graduate instead of 4. I was a part-time senior for 2 years because I felt at the time I was learning as much as I could in the street as I was in the classroom. I was learning theory in the classroom. I was learning the real deal in the street. And so I cut my hours back, became part-time. I say I'm not advocating you do that. I once lectured a class, and after the class, one of the students came up to me and he said, Mr. Hickey, I'm going to go tell my parents that I'm dropping all my classes. And I said, no, yeah, I'm going to tell them you said I should do that. I said, no, that's not what I'm saying. You do not drop your classes. I'm just saying sometimes you make sacrifices, sometimes you have to make decisions. It's been a great career. I went from WKZO, I had a couple of years, I had to serve in the military, I was in the Army, and even then the gods of journalism and the gods of war were smiling upon me because I was assigned to be the radio TV information officer at Fort Benning, Georgia. I was a mouthpiece for the Army for 2 years. Oh yes, I was a propaganda guy for 2 years for the Army. I wrote stuff during the Vietnam War that said how great we were and how we were doing this, and the two big things that happened on my watch. I don't know if you studied in Vietnam history, but you may remember or may recall the My Lai massacre during Vietnam and the subsequent court-martial of an Army lieutenant by the name of William Calley. It was the court-martial, William Calley. That court-martial for that massacre occurred at Fort Benning, where I happened to be stationed, and we were tasked, we in the information office, or the I.O. shop as we called it, were tasked with babysitting and escorting the world media that descended upon Fort Benning for this historic court-martial. Well, that was my first introduction to the big guys in this business, names that were huge stars in the business, and I got to know them. And I said, I want to do what they're doing. I want to travel the world, because I want their job. The second big thing that happened while I was in the service, Congress did away with the draft and created the all-volunteer military service, the all-volunteer Army, which is what we have now. It was called VOLAR. The Army decided to launch this huge advertising campaign on all media in those days, billboards, radio, television, magazines, newspaper, you name it, and shoot a bunch of TV commercials about the volunteer Army. Their slogan back then was, "The Army wants to join you." And they sent the order down. I'll never forget this. The order came from the United States Army Recruiting Command at the Pentagon in Washington. 3rd Army headquarters in, I believe, North Carolina, someplace. Make these TV commercials happen. Order went to Fort Benning, the commanding general. Make these TV commercials happen. The commanding general sent the orders down to the information officer, a lieutenant colonel, who was an artillery guy. He knew nothing about TV. He said, TV? That must be Lieutenant Hickey. Called me up, said, this is yours. I had the responsibility of being the liaison officer for a $5 million advertising campaign that involved a civilian ad agency out of Philadelphia and a civilian production company out of New York, which was a learning experience that I could never have gotten anywhere in the classroom. It was incredible. We shot 4 commercials over a period of a month. My job was to acquire the men and materiel and women. I had to find the troops, the tanks, the guns, the ambulances, the helicopters, the fields, and all of that stuff. Had to acquire those to fit the director's whims and to meet his requirements. So for a month, I can say without shame, I probably was the most powerful second lieutenant in the United States Army for 30 days, which was pretty cool, because I would pick up the phone and call all these high-ranking commanders with their brass and their rank. They had gotten the word from their commander, from the general, who said, if Lieutenant Hickey calls you from the information office, you will take his call, and you will do what he asks. Wow, that's, 21-year-old lieutenant telling all these big shots what they had to do. I was very careful about it. I was, yes, sir, this, sir, that, sir, yes, sir, thank you, sir, God bless you, sir. But it was fun. I went from the Army, I learned a lesson, and this is a lesson you're going to learn, because we all do. No matter how much you do in this business, you're only as good as your last story. That's a truism. You're only as good as your last success. You might have potential, and I'm sure you all do. But by the time I got out of the Army, if you do the math, I had 3 years at the campus, 3 years at the campus radio station, 3 years at WKZO, 2 years as the radio TV information officer. So that's 9 years, right? 8 years. Do the math. I figured by the time I got out of the Army, I'm a veteran now. I've been in this business almost 10 years. I can write my own song here, make my own tune. How wrong I was. Because when I started coming out of the Army, so were a lot of other people my age, all looking for work. A lot of them in this business. I sent out 40 resumes, 40 videotapes to 40 different TV and radio stations as I was getting out of the Army. Not a one would take me on. Not one job came out of that. I was pretty discouraged. One day, the news director of the local TV station where Fort Benning is located in Georgia, Columbus, Georgia, came in. His name is Al Fleming. We were a local source for him because he's right in our backyard. So I would see him a lot. Al came in one day and, I guess I was looking down in the dumps. He said, what's wrong? How are things? I said, not good. I said, I can't find a job. I'm getting out in less than 3 months and I don't have a job. He said, hell, I'll hire you. I said, you will? He said, sure, why don't you ask me? Well, I didn't ask him because his was a little tiny TV station. Been there, done that. I should be able. Detroit should want me. Los Angeles should want me. New York should want me. Columbus, Georgia? But I said, well, I need a job, and yes, Al, that's generous of you. I will work for you. So I got out of the Army, I went to work, stayed in Columbus, went to work for this little tiny TV station. We had 7 people in the news department, including the news director and the sports director. And my boss, Al, also owned a bar. So, you know, he was the anchor man at 6. He'd go out and he'd tend bar for a few hours, and he'd come back and do the news at 11 that I had to prepare for him, hoping that he only tended the bar. Wasn't always that sometimes he came in to work pretty happy for the 11 o'clock news. So, but in hindsight, that was probably the best thing I could have ever done. Because what I learned very quickly, and this is the second thing I want you to take home. What I learned is that the technology of this business, even back in the 70s, even before the rapid technology we have today, had advanced so far in those 2 years that I was behind the times. People were doing things in commercial broadcasting 2 years after I had left it that I had never done and never knew about. But now I had a chance to catch up at this small TV station. I had a chance to relearn my craft. That commercial TV and public relations are a little different. The filming, the cameras we were using, the types of film we were using. In those days, it wasn't videotape, it wasn't live, it was film. And that was probably, again, the journalistic God smiling on me because it gave me a chance to catch up. The piece of advice, and I always get this question from students, what would I recommend you do when you get out of college and you want to succeed in this business? Start small. Don't try to make it to the major markets or to the networks straight out of college. I mean, if you do, God bless you, and you know, put the wind at your back. But I will tell you guys, in the nearly 50 years, can you believe it, 50 years in this business, I have seen a lot of kids come straight out of college who were crackerjack smart, who really knew their stuff and went straight to the big markets or went straight to the networks, and then they crashed and burned because they didn't have the experience. They didn't have the things you never learn in class under their belt. They didn't have the real life chops that you learn out in the field. Stuff that you write books about and stuff that you laugh about and sometimes cry about, and stuff that you never will be taught in the classroom. So my advice always is, take time to learn your craft at a place where if you make a mistake, it's not a career-ending event. I don't advocate trying to make mistakes. You never want to make mistakes. You want to be true. You want to be accurate. You want to be a good journalist. But we all make mistakes. And hopefully, the older we get, the fewer we make. But if you make a mistake in this business, you want to do it in a place where you might piss the boss off, or you might get into a little trouble, but it won't end your career. You make a mistake at the major market, you get your facts wrong, or misreport a story, or miss deadlines, or drop the ball in 1,000 other ways, that's career ending. It's not just job ending, it's career ending, because this is really still a small business. Word gets around. People know you. You know, I worked for ABC for 32 years, ABC News. But everybody at NBC knows who I am. Everybody at CBS knows who I am. Everybody at CNN knows who I am. And likewise, I know who all they are, because we're a small, small fraternity. So the advice is, start small. Whether you want to be on air, or in sales, or in promotions, or in production, whatever your love is, go someplace where you can learn your craft, where you can polish and hone your craft. small market radio stations such as we have here in Jersey, or a mid-market radio or TV station such as you might find in the Midwest or the South, before you go to the, if that's your dream, to go to the big markets, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Detroit, Miami, or to the networks. It's not an easy road. It's a fun road. And by the way, let me just say, I don't want this to be an ongoing lecture. If anybody has questions as I ramble along, please interrupt me, raise your hand. Let's make this a conversation. I'll skip around. I'm just following a linear, I'm tracing linearly my career to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. I finally worked my way up through local stations. I worked in, I told you, Columbus, then I was hired in Atlanta, WSB, worked there for a couple of years, and then worked at KYW in Philadelphia for 4 years. Love Philadelphia. Great TV town. Then in 1980, I got my big break and was hired by ABC News and was sent to Chicago to be a Midwest correspondent, where we covered, as we said, cars and cows, and traveled the Midwest and covered the auto industry and farmers, basically. Those were the two things we covered. And I had made it known to ABC that my desire and dream was to be a foreign correspondent. And this is the third bit of advice that I might want to give you. Set goals. When I started out in this business, when I realized back in college that I really liked being a reporter, first goal was get a real job. I got that, WKZO. Then I had to do this Army thing. I had no choice because I was ROTC graduate. But when I got out, my goal was to work in a big market. I couldn't reach that goal as quickly as I wanted because I've already told you why. The business had passed me by. I had to back up for a couple of years, take some time. But at Columbus, in Columbus, my next goal was to work for a bigger market. I accomplished that when I went to Atlanta. Once I got to Atlanta, now I want to work in one of the big 5 major markets. Accomplished that when I went to Philadelphia. Now I want to be a network correspondent. Accomplished that when ABC hired me. Now I want to be a foreign correspondent. You see, set goals along the way. I let ABC know that I was interested in going overseas. In 1982, I got a phone call from one of the vice presidents who said, we're opening a bureau in Frankfurt, Germany. Whoever goes there must live out of a suitcase, literally, be willing to travel, because this is going to be a travel bureau. In fact, our headquarters in Frankfurt would be inside the airport grounds, the Flughafen, as they say in Germany. We actually wore airport passes. Well, I told him I was single at the time, in my early 30s by now, and I said, my suitcase is packed, I'll go. And I'll tell you what, it was great. I spent 10 years as a foreign correspondent. I lived in Germany for 2 years, covered the world on ABC's dime, flew almost constantly. In 1984 or something like that, I had 96,000 air miles that I traveled the world. I went everywhere. I went to the Far East, I went to the Mid East, I went to South America, I went to India, all over Europe. And I was just loving it because I was a foreign correspondent. And then in 1985, I was transferred by my company to South Africa, where I was the bureau chief in Johannesburg during the uprising and all the fight over apartheid. That was quite an experience too. I love South Africa. Still do to this day. It's a beautiful, beautiful country. It's like God's practical joke in that it's such a beautiful country with such a horrible political and social system. I mean, it's just too bad. But living and working and watching the struggle in South Africa was really an education. Met Nelson Mandela, was at his home in Soweto when he came home from prison for the first time in 27 years. History, as Cheryl said, I covered history. I covered stuff that you guys are reading about in your books today. And we couldn't believe, we, meaning my colleagues and I, all around the world, couldn't believe the stories we were covering. In 1989, I was transferred again. I had a choice. ABC gave me a choice. The story in South Africa was winding down for economic reasons. They were going to downsize the bureau, but they wanted me to move to another place so I could go to Tokyo, London, or New York. Tokyo, Rome, or London. I'm sorry, Tokyo, Rome, or London. Not bad choices when you think about it. Gosh. Went to Rome, and I lived in Rome for 3 years. Lived in this wonderful apartment that we rented, or ABC rented, right in the centro, the center of the city, with a terrace that overlooked the Vatican, one direction, overlooked the hills of Rome in the other direction. This all started like here. This is where all of this started, in a classroom just like this. In the 20th century, there were two really good times to be a foreign correspondent. One was during World War II. Think of Edward R. Murrow and all those folks that covered the war. And the other was the 80s, which is when I was overseas during the 80s, because I covered wars in Beirut, in Lebanon, and I know what sound of artillery is. I've seen awful things. I've lived in awful conditions, and I've also lived in wonderful conditions. I have stayed at the Georges V Hotel in Paris. That's fabulous. I have stayed in a rat-infested hovel in Cezeri, Turkey. There are actually rats in the walls. I could hear them at night. So, you know, it's the experience that you get that is so wonderful in this career, that what makes me so passionate. I am now retired. I worked in the business, if you count my college experience, for 47 years. Long enough. I have some issues with the way television and radio journalism is going today. We can get into that if you wish. I think the technology that we enjoy today with the internet and social media and satellite technology and instant communication, I think it's a double-edged sword. I think it's good because we are able to communicate instantaneously around the world now. Back when I was your age, you know, Vietnam, you shoot a story in Saigon, then you'd have to send the film to New York and it wouldn't be on the air for 24 hours. So there's a 24-hour lag in stories. Now there's a 24 millisecond lag in stories. I mean, it's instantaneous. That's good on the one hand. On the other hand, what that takes away from is the ability to reflect on the stories you're covering. Reporters today have to react instantly. And that leads to mistakes. That leads to misreporting. That leads to shallow reporting. That leads to bad reporting. And it's too bad. Because of the technology, we have so many outlets now. As you know, I don't have to tell you, you all have cell phones, you all have Facebook, you all have access to the internet. But so do we, and so do all the TV stations. Look at all the networks that exist now. It's not just ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN. There's Fox, CNBC, MSNBC. There's the Food Channel. There's the Soap Opera Channel. There's, you know, you go on and on and on. Well, when you have so much competition out there, you have to really concentrate on being better than the next guy. But the problem is you got to be better than so many other next guys. And to fill the news window 24/7, 365 is a real challenge. Because, quite frankly, news doesn't happen 24/7, 365. I mean, it happens a lot. News, you know, they say the news never stops, and that's true. But to fill that time is a real challenge. So you've got two problems. One, you've got to do it instantly, and you've got to fill the time. So what do? You start talking about stuff that is irrelevant? To start reporting about stuff that may be rumor? First time I heard somebody say, there are rumors that, I said, what, are you kidding me? You're reporting rumors? You don't report rumors, you report facts. Well, we've run out of facts, but we haven't run out of time, so we got to report rumors. That's a problem. That's a big problem. So I'm still a big advocate for our business. And I encourage you all, no matter what part of this business you want to get into, again, whether it's sales or music production, A&R or reporting, whatever, I encourage you to tackle it and go after it, because it still can be a good business, and I think you can make it a better business. If you look at it, it's an upside down bell curve. I think we're in the bottom part of the bell curve, and I think this business will come back eventually in quality and stability. I think we have some problems that we have to deal with. It's partisan, just like the country's partisan. I don't want to blow my own horn, but I will tell you, I prided myself all through my career. People never knew a lot of things about me. They never knew what part of the country I came from. They never knew what religion I was. They never knew if I had a religion. They never knew what my political leanings were. They didn't know my ethnic background. I've had people think I'm Greek. I've had people think I'm Irish. I've had people think I'm Italian. I happen to be Irish. But I made it a point to report the news, and nobody ever knew what I thought about the news. That was never my job, to tell you what I thought about the news. My job was to tell you what happened. When I was working in Philadelphia, one of the areas I covered was the mob. I covered the Cosa Nostra, the mafia in Philadelphia. Angelo Bruno and his buddies. One day, I had this wise guy come up to me that I knew. I knew what he did, and he knew I knew. You know, one of these guys. And he said, "Hey, Hickey," he said, "I didn't like what you said on the TV the other night." Uh-oh, this can't be good. He said, "Hey, don't get me wrong. It was fair, but I didn't like it." I said, "Okay, as long as you thought it was fair, then I'm going to stay alive, and that's okay." That's fine. They don't have to like it, but they have to recognize that it's fair and that it is the truth as best you can determine it. Too much today we have, it's not news, it's opinion. Even on the networks, even in my old network, what is passed for news is really opinion, and that's unfortunate. Not that you have opinions, you all should have opinions, but if you're going to have opinions, say it's your opinion. Especially if you're on television or on the radio, say it's your opinion. Don't pretend that this is news. Now, Rush Limbaugh, that's his opinion. We know that, and that's his thing. And I think Rush, as a showman and as a radio personality, is incredible, because look what he's done. But he doesn't pretend to be an impartial reporter. There are people on Fox and on MSNBC, both sides of the political aisle, who pretend to be impartial reporters, but they are anything but. That's a disservice to our fraternity and to our business. So I'm hoping that the pendulum will swing the other way, that we understand that when you report the news, you just say what is, and you know, and you bring to the people. This is why we're called the fourth estate. You know, the three branches of the government were the fourth. This is why Thomas Jefferson thought journalism was so important, because a well-informed public is a much safer public and can make decisions better. But if somebody's feeding you propaganda and opinion all the time, you can't make up your own mind. You have to be able to make up your own mind. Plus, it's fun, the business. I mean, yeah, like I said, I've stayed in some of the best places in the world. I've stayed in some of the worst. I've been shot at. I have run away from mortars. I've had some fine dining. I lived on horrible white bread and cheese sandwiches for a week in India. But, you know, it's all part of the thing. It's all part of the experience. How many people here, first of all, how many people here want to be on-air personalities? Okay, great. I'm glad to see that. How many know what the top 3 stories are today? What is today? April 17th. What are the top 3 stories today? Do you know? You mean the airplane?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The airplane, the crisis in Russia, and
Just happened.
yesterday would have been the crisis with the bombings, the year anniversary of the bombings. Somebody did something.
Okay. I will not say you're wrong. You're right, but that's not all. There's the ship in Korea that capsized. Okay? The reason I ask is that I was thinking about this on the way here today. People who get involved in the news business and on radio and television tend to be insatiable for information. You want to know what's going on. You want to know what's happening, and you just pay attention. Wasn't always that way for me, I'll be honest with you. When I first started out, I read Time magazine, because my high school government teachers said I had to. But it wasn't until I started in the business that I developed this habit and this wanting to know what's going on. And as a reporter, you get to know so many things. You don't report everything you know. That's another cool thing about being a reporter, is that you find out stuff that nobody else knows, and you get to do things that nobody else can do. I will tell you, I'll tell you a quick little story. When I lived in Rome, I covered the Vatican as part of my beat, and I was fortunate enough to travel with Pope John Paul II several times on his airplane. When the president flies on his airplane, it's called what? Air Force One, right? When the Pope flies on his airplane, it's called Shepherd One. And whatever plane the Pope is on is called Shepherd One. So I used to fly with the rest of the media on Shepherd One with Pope John Paul. We'd fly from Rome to Africa and see all the countries and go with him. At one point, ABC wanted to start making provisions. The Pope was starting to get on in age, and you plan these things years in advance. As you probably know, we produce obituaries years and years in advance. Nelson Mandela died recently, right? I have been away from ABC News for a year and a half now. They used my obituary when Mandela died, so I was still on the radio, even though I hadn't been there for a year and a half. So we started planning for Pope John Paul's demise. Not that he was sick or ill, but you just plan on those things at that time. So I had made an appointment with the nun at the Vatican who ran Vatican Radio, because they controlled all the outputs and inputs and all that stuff. Wanted to know what they had available that we could use if and when the time came. So I want you to picture this. Here's St. Peter. You're standing in St. Peter's Square in Rome, okay? You've seen pictures, and maybe some of you have been there, been lucky enough to have been there. But if you remember what St. Peter's Basilica looks like, okay? Here's the door, the big door that the Pope goes through, and the balcony that he stands on, where he blesses the crowds. Way over here, on the second floor, you'll see windows. Well, this is where Vatican Radio has its headquarters, right in through those windows. And they have a whole lot of booths set up. It's like a radio room that you might have here. So, but we don't go through the Pope's door. No, that's only for the Pope. To get inside St. Peter's, you go through a door that's way over here, and you walk up the stairs, and then you traverse down this hall, past this window, to Vatican Radio. Anybody see the Borgias on TV? Do you see that? When the Pope walked down the hall when he was elected Pope? Okay, that's that hall, okay? So here I am now, walking down this hall where popes have walked since St. Peter. I'm going, holy crap, I'm looking around, and I'm getting this private tour with this nun who runs Vatican Radio. So we go to Vatican Radio, we take a look at what's available, we make some arrangements, yada, yada. She gets a call or something, but has to leave to go take care of some business, and she said, can you show yourselves out? Yeah, sure, I think. She said, please take your time, but show yourselves out. I have to go. So now it's just my producer and me over here in the Vatican Radio. We finish what we have to do. We come down the stairs, and we're walking back through this famous sacred hall where all these popes walk. And we come to the window, that famous window that has big, heavy curtains in front of it. I had to. I just had to. I stopped, I looked around, it was just me. And I peeked through the where the Pope goes, and I looked down in the St. Peter's Square, and I go, holy cow, this is where the Pope stands. Somebody down there saw me, thought I was the Pope, started waving. I quickly closed the curtains. I said, we better go. But it's those kinds of things that are, just experiences that you have that are fun and that are a benefit of this kind of business. And you just got to go after them. Riding on tanks, riding on military helicopters, and just doing all this stuff. It's just great fun. I consider my career, I'm probably one of the luckiest persons in the world to have been able to be exposed to all of these events and around the world, here in the US, in South Africa, in Lebanon, in India, in the Philippines. It's just great business. Now, I'd be happy to take questions about anything having to do with this business, anything at all. Remember that my strength is reporting, but I'll answer your question in a minute. Let me answer your question first.
I want to ask you, for college students, would you recommend that internships are a great way to get a job?
Yeah, internships are a very good way to get a job. And there are lots of internships being offered now in a lot of different places. I know ABC has a summer intern program, which is filled for this summer because we're hard onto it. What year are you in?
I'm in my second year.
Okay, well, there's still time. And in fact, what I always do, and I'm happy to do it, if Cheryl can give you my email information, if you're interested in interning at ABC, I can certainly forward your information to my former bosses. I've done that on a couple of occasions, and people have gotten internships. And then I can let other people know too. I mean, like I say, it's a small fraternity. We pretty much all know each other. But I'm happy to pass along the information for you. It's important, as I said at the beginning, to pay attention to who you meet and who you know. And I believe that runs back too. It's important for me to give back. It's important for me. I was helped by Henry. I was helped by my professors. I was helped by a whole bunch, by Al Fleming, who hired me when nobody else would. I want to pay it forward. So, I'm happy to take your resumes and pay it forward. So coordinate that with Cheryl and we'll make that happen. As I just wanted to tell you another story. When I was in Columbus, and these things just happen. I was working at an ABC affiliate, Channel 9, WTVM in Columbus, Georgia. And a friend of mine was the program director of the local rock and roll station. Now this is the Deep South. And they call themselves Big Johnny Reb. And it's the Big 540, WDAK, the Big Johnny Reb. Okay. And he said, my weekend guy just quit. I need somebody to fill in. Would you like to do it? 6 to midnight, Saturday and Sunday. He said, I'll pay you beer money. Okay, why not? I said, but I can't do it as Jim Hickey because, after all, I'm the serious TV news reporter during the week. I can't be the screaming rock and roll guy on the weekend. And he said, no problem. I just bought a jingle package from Pepper Sound Studios in Texas. And, they bought these jingles for the weather, for the news, and every disc jockey on the staff got their own personal singing introduction. And as part of the deal, the sound studio threw in 2 extra names. So my friend says, you can be Jim Walker or Randy Scott. Who do you want to be? I said, I want to be Randy Scott. He said, okay, you're Randy Scott. So for a year, I was Randy Scott on WDAK, the Big Johnny Reb. It was great fun. playing these oldies songs. Well, oldies. It was like new then, but it was great fun. And because I worked 6 to midnight, I was the only one in the radio station. You know, they'd lock the door. The last guy to leave would lock the door behind him, and it would be just me, which meant I had to not only spin the records, I had to play the commercials, I had to rip the wire, I had to water the plants, not really, but I did have to read the meter. And in those days, you had to have a third-class FCC license, which I don't believe is a requirement anymore. But I had my little FCC card, so I would, every hour, I'd have to read the transmitter meter to make sure we were putting out the right amount of power and record it. Plus, I had to answer the phone. And it was great, because it was like my own radio station, playing this rock and roll stuff as Randy Scott. And I took phone calls and dedications. I got a call one day. Hey, Randy. Yeah. You know that reporter over at Channel 9, that Jim Hickey guy? I said, no, I know who you mean, but I don't know him. Wow, man, you sound a lot like him. I said, I do. He said, yeah. I said, well, thanks, but, you know, I don't know it. And I actually said this. Again, I don't know. I've never met him, but I hear he's a hell of a nice guy. So I did that for a year, and it was just fun, you know, but my heart and my soul, my love was news. And so I stayed with that. I still like pretending to be a disc jockey. I mean, I still love radio. Radio to me, if you take radio and television, you now know I worked in both mediums for a long time. And with no disrespect to my TV brethren, none at all, because I worked it, I think radio is the more creative medium. Skepticism in the classroom. The reason I say that, when you're reporting on television, you have a cameraman, a producer, a sound man or woman, an editor, man or woman, and you have video. You got lots of tools to help you tell your story, right? For television. For radio, it's you, baby. It's just you. And you have to paint word pictures. You can't rely on video to help you create the scene. You have to create the scene with your words and with sound, and you have to do it in a way that is to the point and is quick and clear and has the factual reference that you want to get across. So I've always thought radio is more creative in that way. I'll get arguments from my TV brother, and that's fine, you know, because television is the nirvana of this business. And I loved my television work. I loved being a reporter. But radio is my passion. Always has been. I still dabble in it. I do voiceover work now. I built a little studio in my basement at home, and I do some of that. But it's great fun. Any other questions? Yeah.
When you were with ABC News, were you on the radio or were you on television?
Both. From 1980 until 95, I was part of the TV Correspondence Corps, but all correspondents at ABC are expected to file for radio. In 95, in the interest of full disclosure, 95, I was told that big changes were coming in the Correspondence Corps and that there was no guarantee that I would have my job in 6 months. They said, not that you've done anything wrong, it's just that we're making changes. Truth be told, I no longer fit the demographic, if you catch my drift. I was getting older, and they were looking for younger people, they were looking for minorities, they were looking for a different kind of correspondent corps, which was needed and needed to be done. But they said, we don't want to lose you as a journalist. We think that you have value to ABC as a journalist. Television may not be your peg anymore. However, radio wants you badly. I had been loyal to radio all the time I was reporting for television. I always made sure I filed for radio. I always made sure that I kept updated. So I just moved. I moved laterally from TV over to radio full time anchored the news for a while, did a lot of live coverage. I anchored when 9/11 happened. I was in the radio studio then, because that was 2001. I started over at ABC Radio in '95. I was walking across the newsroom at 8:46 in the morning, that Tuesday morning. We have banks of TVs embedded in the ceiling, hanging from the ceiling with all different screens lit. One of them had a fixed camera on the World Trade Center that was used by almost everybody in town for weather backdrops. You've seen those. And as I'm walking through the newsroom, I noticed, look up and I say, is that smoke coming from the World Trade Center? And everybody stopped and said, yeah, gee, what's that all about? Well, you know what happened, and you know what it was. I went on the air at 8:47, 1 minute later, with a bulletin that an airplane had crashed into the World Trade Center. At that time, we thought it was a small plane. We didn't know. And I figured, boy, some pilot has really screwed up here, because this is bad. Quickly became evident it was much bigger than that. We went on the air at 9 a.m. with what we call wall-to-wall coverage, anchored coverage. Just open up the full network, told all of our affiliates we're going to provide continuous coverage of this event. I'm anchoring. I started talking at 9 o'clock in the morning. I didn't finish that day until 7 o'clock that night in this coverage, because it was continuous coverage. And then, I don't know how well you remember that 12 years ago, or 13 years ago, we couldn't get out of Manhattan because they had shut Manhattan down. So we stayed in town. Everybody had to stay in town. I had to sleep on the couch of a colleague of mine because there were no hotel rooms. I didn't go home for 3 days, and we just did round-the-clock coverage. And, everybody knows where they were on that horrible, horrible day. I'll certainly never forget that. And, sitting there watching, the monitors as I'm on the air, and I see this second plane crash into the second tower. I mean, that was just, and still try to maintain my professional demeanor. I can't go screaming and crying and yelling, although I've listened to tapes and wow, what is it? It was awful. But it was awful, but it is part of what I did. It's part of my history, part of everything I experienced. So you see what this business can do for you, if you just really throw yourself into it. Any other questions? Yeah.
What's it like having like a family and like kids? Is it hard to have
Yeah.
that balance?
Yeah. I have 2 marriages. My first marriage ended when I worked in Philadelphia. And it's tough. I'm still friendly with my ex-wife. I mean, we're not enemies. Yeah. And my son now is an actor in Los Angeles, and he's doing well. And he has a daughter. I have a granddaughter. But yeah, it's tough, especially if you travel a lot. As I said, I was single when I went overseas, so that was perfect. And I was ready to live out of a suitcase and ready to travel. I wasn't attached to anybody, and it was fine. But it can be hard, and it takes a lot of work, because the demands of the business are tremendous, especially if you're covering the news. Yeah.
What do you think produces news quicker, radio or TV?
Radio. Yeah, simply because of the logistics of the thing. When I worked at ABC Radio, I would sit here like I had a cubicle with a microphone, and I could go on the air from my position at any second. The senior editor could say, Hickey, you're on the air. And I push a button, I'm on the air. Or sitting next to me right here was a cubicle that we used for special reports that was wired so that it was always linked to a satellite. And the satellite would go out to all the affiliates. Over here, somebody had to switch something to make me go on the air. Over here, I just sit there, push the button, boom, I'm out there. And so that's the way we set it up, so that we could do special reports instantly. Caused problems a couple of times. I'd be busy working on a story, you know, earphones so I didn't bother anybody. I'm working over here, and the editor would say, Hickey, special report, now. I go, on what? Just do it. But on what? Oh, you don't know. You know, I don't know what's happening. Let me know. But we would have to, I mean, that's the tough part, because you'd have just a bare amount of information. And again, this goes back to what I said a moment ago. The competition is so fierce now to be first that you're forced to go on the air. And there's still some of us who would rather be second but be right, and then be first and be wrong. But the pencil pushers, the accountants don't see it that way. If you're first, you can say, we were first. We did this. We're always there first. Yeah, but you're wrong 50% of the time. But, you know, what good is that? Well, yeah, but we're first. So yeah, it's, but, to answer your question, radio is fast that way. Television, they always maintain a flash crew, what's called a flash cam. It's a camera that is fixed, nobody's running it, and focused on a chair, so that if somebody had to get there quickly, you could sit there and boom, a director could just fire it up. Otherwise, to go on the air, you've got to call in a camera operator, you've got to call in a director, you've got to call in a floor manager, you've got to get a talent down in the seat. That takes a few minutes to do. Radio, push a button and you're there. Did you have another question? No? Yeah.
What's your biggest piece of advice for radio and TV when you're on the air?
You got good pipes, by the way. When you're on the air, don't swear. Don't say four-letter words. When you're on the air, you have to be able to think and talk at the same time. And that may sound silly, but you have to be able to think about one thing and talk about another. That's when it gets tough. Because more often than not, especially if you're doing live coverage, are you talking about news reporting? Because even disc jockeying, you've got stuff going on. But news reporting, more often than not, you'll have a producer in your ear say, we've got so-and-so standing by, go to so-and-so. Or we've got a new development, take a look at your wires. So now you're talking, listening, and reading at the same time. So you got to be able to multitask. And if you're out at 10 or 28:52, you're going to lop somebody's commercial off for 2 seconds. You're going to make the sponsor angry, going to make the salesperson unhappy, going to make your boss unhappy. Just don't do that. Yeah, because time is money on the radio. I was talking to a salesperson for press communications just the other day, and he was talking about sales, which is a very important part of what we do. It's not an area that I've ever been in full time. I understand it, kind of, but I've never been in it. But sales, he says, you know, people think audiences are what make radio money. He says, that's not true. He says, sales make radio money. But then I thought, well, the more audience you have, the better the sales. Isn't that true? Not necessarily. It's how you sell the product to the advertiser. You can have all the listeners in the world, but if you have a lousy product on the air, you're not going to sell it to the advertiser. So I learned something, even now. I never realized that. I learned that. Of course, having most listeners helps, because you can then say, we have more exposure for your product that you want to advertise than anybody else. But you still have to be able to produce the product on air, the commercial, in a good way. But watch the time. I got sidetracked there. Don't get sidetracked. Watch the time. Be able to back time. Be able to understand, you know, what it takes to be out at a certain time. Be able to multitask. And just be aware of what's going on around you. That would be the best thing I can say at this point. Yes, ma'am.
With being an international reporter, touched on, being in Beirut, being in South Africa. Would you share with the class possibly one of the most dangerous experiences that you went through? What you might have thought would have happened or could have happened and what actually did happen, especially now. Reporters are still in danger's way all around the world.
I counted once, and I think I figured out I covered something like 13 different uprisings, civil wars, or conflicts around the world. And by far the most risky ones were Beirut and South Africa. Beirut because they used real heavy weapons, and there were so many factions, and it was very, very confusing. There were so many factions, it was hard to keep straight who was on whose side in Lebanon, in Beirut. Christians, Lebanese, Syrians, Morabitun, Israelis. I mean, it was incredible. South Africa was dangerous because so many people were involved in the uprising, and it got pretty violent for a while. But I would say the single most dangerous thing that ever happened probably was in Tripoli, Lebanon, not Tripoli, Libya, Tripoli, Lebanon. Tripoli is located north of Beirut, about as far from Beirut as Freehold is from here. And for a while there was an internal battle going on within the Palestinian organization. Most of the fight during the time I was in Beirut was between the Palestinians and the Israelis. But this particular battle was within the Palestinian organization because there was a group of PLO that was supported by Yasser Arafat and another group that was supported by Syria. And Syria was just meddling, was trying to split the Palestinian organization, divide and conquer kind of thing, because Syria wanted to come in and take over. I mean, it's a very complex political situation. Suffice it to say that there was this week-long running battle between these two factions of the Palestinian organization, the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. I want you to picture this battlefield in Tripoli, Lebanon. And as you face the battlefield, on one side, off in the distance, are the mountains, kind of blue-gray haze. And over here in the distance, not the far distance, but a distance, was a little village, shacks and what all. Arafat's PLO people were here. Syria's PLO people were up there from the mountains. And they were shooting at each other, artillery and mortars and stuff like that. And in front of you is this open field, basically. It's like you're at a soccer match or a football game or whatever. We happened to find, we being my crew and I, happened to find an apartment building that stood on the edge of this battlefield in between the two sides, about 6 stories tall. And every day we would go to this apartment building, walk up these 6 stories because they had a terrace that the owner of the place allowed us to use. My camera woman, Jane Hartman was her name, fearless, most fearless person I've ever known, would go out there with her camera every day and she'd shoot the war, the battle, bang, bang, back and forth. We'd go down and we'd go back to Beirut, file the story. And the 6th day, it's very biblical, this story, because on the 6th day there was peace and a ceasefire. So we went up to the same apartment building and shot the piece. Jane went out there with a camera. It was very quiet. You could hear the birds chirping. There was no gunfire. Off in the distance that way was an oil refinery that was burning because all smoky because of the battle. But other than that, it was just quite a lovely day. Okay, we're done. Pack up our gear and we go downstairs and we are walking away from the terrace. We get maybe 30 yards away, and that terrace that we'd been standing on blew up and disappeared. Disappeared. And this huge explosion. Somebody zeroed in on that terrace while we were standing there, I'm confident, and either waited until we left or couldn't get their stuff together in time to shoot. But they were either sending us a message or somebody a message that we're still here, because that wasn't accidental. Well, as this thing is crumbling now, this place that we were standing on, had we been standing there, I wouldn't be standing here today. That is without a doubt. Somebody thought somebody broke the ceasefire, so sure enough, boom, somebody else fired, and then boom, somebody else, and we're back to it again, and it starts all over again. But now, we're out here in the middle of it all, and we're in the middle of this firefight, and the stuff is raining down around us, mortars and artillery shells. And I'm thinking, holy crap. So we run very fast to get to our car, which was parked in the village. We jump in a car. We had a Lebanese driver, Qasim was his name, and he had an old, big green Mercedes, old one, that he drove around Lebanon. And we yelled, we got to get the hell out of here, because all hell was breaking loose. I mean, this was bad. Building we were in was burning and smoking. The ground was blowing up, and all kinds of, it was like the movies. So Qasim takes off like a shot down this dusty road. He's doing this, it was really like the movies. All of a sudden, he screeches to a halt next to this little house, and he just stops there. And my sound man, a German, Didi Arndt, is in the back seat. He's going crazy, and he's yelling in German, "What the hell are you doing? You're going to kill us. Why don't you go?" I said, "Didi, calm down." "Qasim, why did you stop?" And he says, "Wait." So we wait about 10 seconds, and the road in front of us blew up. And he says, "Now we go." And off we went. How he knew, I haven't a clue. He just had this sense that we can't go. We have to stay right here. And I'm telling you, that road just went wham! And he goes, "Now we go." Okay. And off we went. So that was, I went back, and I'll confess, I had a drink or two at the bar when I went back to Beirut that night. That was pretty rugged. I've lost some colleagues in the field. A reporter and a cameraman I knew, a producer I knew, have been killed. There's a difference today, and now this gets a little bit into current events and political, but what the heck, we're friends, right? We're talking. I have come to believe that when I was overseas, the fact that we had two superpowers in the early 80s, we had the United States, we had the Soviet Union, made it much safer for people like me, because the Soviet Union and the United States controlled all these other nation states, if you will, as far as aggression is concerned. Nobody moved in Lebanon or in Libya or in Syria or in Jordan. Nobody did anything without the blessing of either Washington or Moscow. So we didn't have rogue terrorists back then. We didn't have people running around with their own nuclear weapons and own agendas. Today, of course, we do. Today, it is a very, very dangerous time for reporters overseas. I'm not sure I'd go overseas if I had the opportunity today. First of all, I have a wife, I have a grandchild, so things are different. But it's very different now, because without the influence of the Soviet Union, without the influence in respect to the United States, all these other nation states have their own militias, and they act on their own. They don't need permission from anybody to do what they're doing. And if you're a reporter and they want to take you out, they'll take you out. No repercussion. Those days there was repercussions. So it's different. Again, I hope that changes someday. But it's interesting to watch over 30 years how things have changed. Again, despite a building blowing up behind me, and I know what the sound of a bullet is going past my ear, and I've tasted my share of tear gas, and certainly in South Africa, I would never give that up. That was just a wonderful, wonderful experience for me. And, I'm happy to talk about it. I think I'm one of the luckiest guys in the world who have been able to experience all that. Any other questions? Yeah.
What kind of voiceover work do you do?
I have recorded 4 audiobooks. I do that kind of stuff. I'm not doing it every day. I just do it when I get the hankering. I've done some commercials. I'd love to do documentary work. I want the History Channel to come calling. I'd love to do that. Anybody else? Yeah.
When you were with ABC for all those years, did they ever give you like a week, a month, any time off, or were you just gung-ho every day?
Well, everybody got vacations. And overseas in those days, we were given a month home leave in addition to other vacation time, wherein we could go home for 30 days and just enjoy home. However, there was a period while I was still living in Johannesburg, I was assigned to the Persian Gulf for 12 weeks straight. And my wife finally called my boss in London and said, you either send him home or you send me to the Persian Gulf. They sent me home. No. But you get time off. The way it works, though, is the holidays. You are given holidays off without the expectation of actually having those holidays off. You may, and you probably will, have to work Christmas or Hanukkah or New Year's or whatever, or 4th of July, but you'll get days off to compensate for that. You may not get the day off. And I went for years without ever having Christmas off. Years. You just deal with it. What?
No, I just cracked my back. I thought you
Oh, any other questions? Listen, I think you're in a great program here. You have a great instructor. Cheryl's just terrific. Again, if you have any questions, I'm here for a little while. And if you want me to pass anything along, talk to Cheryl. She'll make sure I get it, and I'll be happy to do that. I think that's what we need to do. This is a great, great business. It's not without its difficulties and its problems, but hey, you're going to solve them all, right? Thank you.